Good morning, Guam. Right on, and thank you for starting your day the KUAM way with our starting lineup, of course, Tuesdays. My name is Chris Barnett, and this is my Facebook Live show, Group Chat. And our group this morning on the couch here, we have Dr. Romeo Juliet, who wears many hats. I'm not sure which. Are you going to be wearing a couple at the same time this morning? Right. So he's a member of the Guam Board of Education. And from Speaker Tina Munia Barnes' office, we have Shirag Bajwani, who's a communications specialist. And let's just get right into it. A lot of talk, a lot of discussion been generated about this trio of bills. Really kind of struggling with what to call them. Some people call it a Romeo and Juliet bill. I know at least one of them is. The Attorney General's office didn't really like that Romeo and Juliet thing.
The technical name is the close age provision.
Right, yeah. So there's been a lot of discussion, and I think Bill 50 has been taking the lion's share of discussion, and that's the bill that would mandate a close age exception of less than 4 years between actors and teenage consensual sex. And I guess we just start with you, if you could just walk us back, because a lot of people in the media and in the public were kind of just scratching their heads that this kind of came out of, I mean, I'm pretty sure it did come from somewhere, but the appearance is that it kind of came out of nowhere, you know what I mean?
So I think the second week we took office, we had a meeting with the Assistant Attorney General at the Speaker's office, and she highlighted to us a couple lapses in the law that needed some easy, quick legislative fix. A week or two later, she gave us drafts of it, and we introduced it. We never actually wrote the bill. They came up with the language, they came up with the idea, and what we did was just facilitate the discussion, and it's good that we're having this discussion right now. And I feel that it's important with any type of public policy. Civic engagement is always important.
Right. Now, has the civic engagement and the public response been what you guys expected?
Well, I think there's a lot of learning that we're all doing. Even just today,
right.
Dr. McNinch and I were talking, and I finally found out new facts that there were 20 active cases between 2016 and 2018. While the law says one thing, the AG's office decides to just not touch it at all because they don't want to label a minor as a sexual offender. And because of that, prior to 2016, what they did was they were having them enter felonies and serve a minimum 1-year jail time. And I guess what we're trying to do with this bill is, because of the auto certification law that was passed 3 years ago, the prosecution cannot turn these 16 and 17-year-olds over to family court or juvie court, where this would be a appropriate venue for this matter to be addressed.
Right. So when you say that that they can't turn it over to court, but then they're demonstrating discretion and almost leniency in some of these cases that we're hearing about now, is there a contradiction there?
Well, right now they're not touching it. Right. We want them to actually have the people who are better equipped to deal with these types of issues and have them address this matter. Obviously, when you're talking about a 16-year-old, a 15-year-old, right. There's always that, the child is still developing, whether it's the victim.
I mean, 16-year-olds are still developing, quite frankly.
But even a 16-year-old, whether you're a 16-year-old victim or a 16-year-old perpetrator,
right.
You're still developing. You need help, and when we don't turn it over to the family court, we don't turn it over to juvie court, we don't have the family law division deal with it, we're having criminal lawyers deal with it, we're charging them as if they're raping somebody. The charge is the same, which
right.
is not.
Yeah, and I think that this is where a lot of opinions start to part ways, is because in the proponents of these bills, and specifically Bill 50, keep throwing out this 16-year-old and 15-year-old example, which, it sounds reasonable. You're right. A 16-year-old who has consensual sex with a 15-year-old shouldn't, be treated the same as someone who rapes somebody. But that's the low end of the bill's scale. So this bill, and we'll bring Dr. McNinch in now. This bill allows a close age exception of less than 4 years, which technically means 3 years and 364 days. And so this is where we came out with the first story, and then the response was kind of it's misinformation, it's this, it's that. But I mean, Dr. McNinch, you came out, and I know this is kind of a real issue that's really hitting you pretty close, is because you feel like as a board member, one of your responsibilities is to kind of protect the kids, and you don't think this bill really does that.
Sure. Well, first, I want to make perfectly clear, Speaker Barnes is one of my favorite senators, and I know absolutely she cares about the health and safety of children. So does Amanda Shelton, and certainly Senator Chalahe, and certainly Senator Bisco-Lee. And so I want to make very, very clear that while I don't like these bills, I know that they have good intentions at their very, very heart. I want to make very clear about that. And while I disagree, and also I believe the Attorney General and the Assistant Attorney General who suggested this also has good intentions. And so there's no question about that. And Chirac, you're here with us today. That shows good faith that this is a community discussion,
right,
and that this is an important discussion, and we need to get a consensus. And I think that that's what's missing in the process, is if we can get, my own feeling, rather than bills themselves, get all the right people together in the right room and talk about what's the best policy. And what policy works best for Guam. Not something we borrowed from some other jurisdiction.
Copy and paste.
Right.
Yeah.
And if we can do that, I think that, it's not, in politics, we like to say, it's not about getting back or getting even with people. It's what's going to get us ahead. And so for me, what's going to get us ahead? I think it's getting, and in fact, there's a lot of social workers in the community. There's a lot of law enforcement folks in the community, a lot of educators in the community. And we also have a lot of pressures on the school board. Last year, and I have no issue with this, we now have to deal with 18-year-olds. So it used to be only we have to deal with 16-year-olds. Now we have to deal with 18-year-olds. We have a demand right to education. There are all these pressures on our systems, and then we end up having laws that kind of, rock our boat a little bit.
And this is a law that really is just going to land, squarely on students. We're talking about the age of people who go to school. On
teachers who have to manage these things. A teacher is responsible for the health and safety of their students just as much as a parent is. Mm-hmm. And I think everybody here in this room and everybody involved with these policies all have good ideas and good hopes for these things, but we need to find where the balance is.
Let's just cut right to the chase, and I think the worst part of this Bill 50 is that the close age exception is less than 4 years, and so we had brought up right off the bat that this would open the window for 19-year-olds to pray or consensually have sex with 15-year-olds, and that I think is kind of one of the biggest eye openers.
Yeah, I think that's a big problem. Also, 18-year-olds and 14-year-olds.
Right.
Also, the impression that this is only older guys preying upon younger girls. That's not always the case. There are younger males who are also at issue here, who are very impressionable and very vulnerable populations. And I think that we just need to have a healthy, positive discussion on this.
That's no fun. I was hoping for a heated debate.
Well, we do have a debate, and the debate is we're living in a civil environment, and Chirac has a tie on, and we're always polite, right?
I forgot my tie.
I know, I forgot mine too. That's right.
So, I interviewed the Attorney General about this bill. I interviewed you as well, but we want to kind of play the story I did last week with Attorney General Levin Camacho and his kind of response to a lot of the grumblings of the community, including some grumblings from Dr. Ron McNinch. Once again, this is GroupChat. My name is Chris Barnett, and thank you for starting your day the KUAM way. Check this out.
Attorney General Levin Camacho responding to Board of Education member Dr. Ron McNinch's criticism of a bill that would reduce penalties for teens having consensual sex. McNinch telling KUAM News the bill would lead to predatory sexual behavior.
I don't know how anyone could rationally say that a 16-year-old having consensual sex with a 15-year-old should be treated exactly the same way as someone who forcibly rapes another human being. So I don't agree with it that it's enabling sexual predators. He has his opinions on it. It's just not an accurate reading of the law.
Camacho repeatedly using the 16-year-old having consensual sex with a 15-year-old analogy, but the bill allows a less than 4-year age gap between actors, meaning technically, and the law is all about technicalities, a 19-year-old having consensual sex with a 15-year-old would only be charged with a misdemeanor.
So it's less than 4 years, right? So when you say 19, if you have a 19-year-old, then 15 and 11 months, and sure, you're within that range, but it's going to be very specific to the age of the actual people that are engaging in consensual sex.
Right now, the parent of a 15-year-old who has consensual sex with a 19-year-old could protect their child by demanding the 19-year-old be charged with a second-degree felony. But if the bill passes, the same parent would have to deal with the same 19-year-old having sex with their 15-year-old child being charged with just a misdemeanor. However, the AG says as it stands now, teen relationships are subject to how the parents feel about those relationships.
And her parents are okay with me, wow, I'm not going to get charged. It just takes one vindictive parent, to go in and say, well, I don't like this boy or girl, and I want to press charges, and I want to hit them with a second-degree felony.
Camacho tells KUAM News the set of bills introduced by Speaker Tina Muñoz-Barnes and Senators Jose Piro Terlahi, Amanda Shelton, and Regine Bisco-Lee would actually stiffen penalties by including a repeat offender clause with heavier punishment.
A 16-year-old who has consensual sex with a 15-year-old, they get charged and convicted of a misdemeanor. If they are charged and convicted again, they face, I think, 10 years.
While proponents of the bill say the bills address a need, Camacho couldn't provide numbers or data showing just how many teens are affected by how the current law addresses consensual teen sex. But he did say the measures, if passed, are better than his office making judgment calls.
You want to be proactive. The last thing you want to do is you want to have a case where a 16-year-old has consensual sex with a 15-year-old. We charge them with a second-degree felony, and then it's too late.
While these measures have definitely started a conversation in the community, Camacho tells KUAM News he encourages that discussion and even criticism.
Let's talk about it. If you don't think 4 years is the right amount, it should be 3 years, 2 years. Talk to your senators.
For Guam's News Network, Chris Barnett reports. And, watching that interview, and I don't know if it's intentional or not, but I noticed that, again, the proponents keep using this 16-year-old and 15-year-old analogy, which is really playing it safe because that's not what the bill would allow. Doc?
Yeah, we need to have a lot of good, healthy discussions on this. We need to get the right people in the room. I am deeply concerned. Here's what I'm concerned about. Any person can be idle in school and flunk grades and be in the 9th grade at 18 years old.
Call them super seniors, but that would be a super freshman.
19 years old, 18 years old in the 9th grade. And they're with 13 and 14-year-olds. We need to have some serious talks about boundaries, and we need to have the right people to, and it could be there are alternative systems we haven't considered yet. That if the current system's not working, what are some better choices we can make? None of this has been discussed yet.
Right.
And I think we should have these discussions.
Yeah, and I think I think that when you guys introduced these bills, it just was a good knee-jerk reaction. We haven't even gone to the public hearing, right? Yeah. But it's been a pretty public hearing.
And that's why it's good that we started this discussion early on in the term so that we give ourselves ample time to actually address the issue. What we did as our office is, we brought the issues to the forefront, and now we're getting engagement from Dr. McNitt, from you, from the sexual assault response team.
Right, yeah.
Everybody's finally coming to the table, and we're having this discussion. Some of them have issues with the 4 years. They have recommended maybe bring it down to 3. And I've spoken to some members of the Attorney General's office who are amenable to the 3 years.
Right.
So let's continue having this discussion. Everybody out there, everybody at home, we want your opinion. We want to hear what you have to say, parents most especially.
Yeah, and that's what I wanted to kind of transition my next question to is, for the parents out there, in the interview, the AG brought up the example of, one vindictive parent. So, and I think the example he used was a 15-year-old having consensual sex with someone who's older than them, 16 being the age of consent. And I think his words were something like, all it takes is one vindictive parent to want to press charges. And but I feel like that's our right as parents. I mean, as a parent, I'm going to do everything in my power to protect my child who's 15, who's 14, who's 16. And that's where I felt like this close age exception really kind of seems to be legislating what parents can do to protect their children.
I call that a responsible parent, not a vindictive parent.
Yeah, and I didn't agree with his choice of words.
And I mean, I think part of it is he's new. And by the way, I like Attorney General Levin.
So do a lot of other people.
I really do.
Yeah.
And I think that part of it can be our word choices, but the key thing is, and this is what everybody needs to ask themselves: do they want their 15-year-old son or daughter running around with somebody who's 19 years old? Do they want their 18-year-old son or daughter thinking that it's okay to socially mingle with a 14-year-old? All these are, and by the way, there's lots of different angles in terms of degrees of badness or goodness. I have to say that we have a lot of other considerations we need to talk about. A young person who has a baby at 14 or a baby at 15, there's a lot of considerations there, family considerations, and of course parents are going to be concerned about it. I mean, it is something that's a high concern. One other thing. Alaska's #1, we're #2 in terms of the rape rate in the United States.
Right, and Alaska's close age exception is, it's really wide.
Right.
I mean, I thought this bill was wide.
We gotta be a little bit more careful on a small island.
Right. Yeah.
Because, Chris, I've known you 23 years. I see you all the time.
Yeah.
When people have these really bad encounters, they see each other forever here.
Yeah.
They don't go away. And it's a very different environment.
So what would you say to those parents out there? Because I feel as a parent, I mean, you know, I have a young daughter. I have a couple daughters. One of them's too old to put in this conversation. But if my daughter's 15 and some 19-year-old is, you know, trying to be in a relationship with her, and, you know, I know that a 15-year-old is not fully developed mentally or physically, I'm going to call the cops on the 19-year-old. And I'm going to definitely want to press charges, the most charges that I could press.
And you're absolutely right. You know, I'm not a parent, but if I were in your shoes, I would probably react the same way.
Right.
But
and I'm
also,
sure you'd be a great parent. I can tell.
So what would you say to those parents out there who feel that this bill is, you know, kind of legislating away their authority?
But you also, on the other side of that argument, and I'm just being the devil's advocate
Right,
here.
yeah.
If you had a 15-year-old child who's having a relationship with a 14-year-old, in the eyes of the law, that's still the same. It's a second-degree felony.
But that's where you have to get the right people in the room to say,
Yeah.
what's the best policy course of action? Not just, and I'm not knocking the singular AG who came out with this idea.
He's taking all the heat. I mean, you heard Sherrod
Yeah.
was like, hey, we didn't write the thing. We got it from the AG's office.
Well, again, I know that sometimes people hear what's going on in other jurisdictions and they immediately think, wow, that's the new shiny new toy and we should do it here.
Yeah.
But we need to have the right people help with that.
And there are examples. I mean, for, you know, Oregon, and doing my research last night, their close age exception is less than 3 years. Some states have less than 2 years. Some states employ like a sliding close age exception. So it's one age window for 14-year-olds, another for 15-year-olds, another for 16-year-olds.
But we have a,
Before
I'm sorry.
I just want to correct you on one thing.
Yes, sir.
We're not throwing the AGs under the bus. We're
Right.
just saying we're glad
It's a
he
figure
brought
of speech,
the,
yeah.
we're glad he
Right,
brought
right,
the
yeah.
argument to the forefront.
Sure.
And I think, you know, this is very brave of his office, and I think he was smart in the sense that let's do it early. Let's have this discussion.
I kind of disagree with you. I think politically there were other things that he could have done to reap. So I feel like you, and I know he's probably not a political person. I mean, he's elected to a political office, but I think you build your coin early. You know, we were looking at a violent crime wave. You know, drug related crimes. That's what people are worried about. They're not necessarily worried about you know, teens having consensual sex or, you know, people writing bounce checks. I think that it's a matter of priorities, and while I see that you say that he brought it up early so you guys could work out the kinks, I see that, but
We have the data. There are 20 active cases. That means, you know, because they're minors, you don't only have one victim.
Right.
You have 2 victims with each of these. That's 40 victims that right now we're just passing the buck. We're saying we're gonna cut you a break and defer your felony. That's not really a.
I'd like to see the data, though. I mean, I know you have a printout here, but I'd like to see it in the actual documents from the court and whatnot. And I mean, I'm not saying that it's not a problem. Nobody's saying that. I just think we're all saying that the less than 4 year age exception.
And I think there's gonna, you know, I can't predict the future, but I can see that we will have this discussion, and
Right.
I'm sure one of the biggest issues that has been brought to the forefront now is the 4 years. And having talked to some of the assistant attorney generals, they're amenable to 3. But again, 3 for some people is still lenient. So
Right.
then you brought up the sliding provision. That's
Yeah.
something that maybe we should look at. And
Nice. Hey, you're welcome.
Two quick things.
Thank
I hope that we can put maybe a 4-month window on this thing, so we let everyone know this is not going to be a rushed process. Really, if we're talking about making true, genuine policy, we do it before the next school year starts in August. So of course that'll be the bracket. We have a nice long discussion, but there's an added dimension nobody's talking about here. Yeah, our age of consent here is 16. In the FSM, in Ponape it's 16, but in the other 3 states it's 14. So in Chuk and in Yap and in Koshrai it's 14. And that's that's provided the internet's correct. And that's one thing I'm always cautious about because I'm relying on what the internet
First page
says.
Google.
Right. Well, I double checked it, and they did change their law to increase it from 13 to these higher levels a couple of years ago, 2-3 years ago, and that's an added dimension that fuels some of these concerns. Is we have to go through if suddenly we say you're 19 and a younger person is okay, it's not a healthy message. We need to articulate. And there's one other thing I want to say. If you have an 18 or 19-year-old son in particular, and they feel they need to be running around with a 15 or 14-year-old girl, maybe there's something that you need to check on your parenting or on who's guiding that young person on how to be a man. Because running around with a 13 or 14 or 15-year-old girl and you're 18 or 19 years old, that means that there's something wrong with your socialization.
You know, I saw a media report where they had interviewed the board chair about this, I think specifically this bill, Bill 50, and what did you make of his comments? Is he coming down on one side or the other?
No, Mark likes data. Mark likes to make informed decisions. He's the board chair, so
Right.
he always likes to get all the information right. But both the superintendent and the chair believe that this will affect our policies and how we deal with things, and so that's going to take a lot of time for us in terms of. That's why we should have a window to develop good policy.
And how open are you guys to this discussion? Is it maybe you guys didn't write the bill, so
I mean,
the AG or the AG
we've
said, hey,
had-
talk to the senators.
We've had people call in. I answered the speaker's phone on Friday, and I spoke to Dr. McNinch. You're not the only one that's been calling in, and we as somebody who started out in politics really young, somebody who they've through the Junior State of America program, the Close-Up program, one thing they drill in your head is civic engagement, and I think this is testament that we have a very engaged community, and while sometimes they may not agree with what we say, they may be strong opponents. You have to look at it from an advocate of democracy. This is a good thing that we have people who actually care to come out and express their concerns, and we welcome these comments. You're more than welcome to come in, have a discussion with us, call our office. Most importantly, please do show up at the public hearing.
When's the public hearing?
I checked this morning. The bill has not been referred to a committee yet.
Right, yeah.
I'd hold a few community stakeholder meetings first. Second thing that I think is really, really important is, and I want to be very clear about this. I teach criminal justice at the university. I'm a strong believer in allowing the Attorney General's office, the prosecutors, full discretion on all of these cases, whether to pursue them, not to pursue them. I have full faith in their division to do that. And I think that, and I respect that. I think that there are reasons that they do or do not go after certain cases, and they know all of the facts. We don't always know all of the facts.
Right, yeah. To counter that, Doc, in the interview with the AG, Levin Camacho, he said that while he understands that they can use discretion, it's a lot better for them to have the law, like these laws, as kind of a baseline instead of having the prosecutors out there, and I mean, that's what he said.
Well, I don't believe that the AG's office are a bunch of werewolves. When the moon's just right, they turn a certain way.
Yeah.
I think that it's leadership driven. The Attorney General's office is a general. They have a general at the top,
Right.
And it's a leadership driven organization, and they follow the intentions of what that general says.
So based on what I was talking about with the Assistant Attorney General, you're a proponent of discretion, but the one thing that they don't have with regards to discretion is bringing this to juvie court because of the automatic certification.
But that's where we get the right people in the room. We craft a policy that creates that default.
So maybe that's something.
And that was not in these bills I see.
Well, we would automatically, because
Oh.
it's not an automatic
But it does
felony.
it in a
you can-
roundabout way. That's what the issue is. So, food for thought. I
that
think
would-
we just have a lot to talk about. How about that?
No, I completely agree.
What about the good parts of, there's a trio of bills, and the other two bills,
So the safety valve provision, I guess when Speaker William Barnes introduced the safety valve bill a couple terms ago, criminal sexual conduct was removed from it so that judges can provide leniency for those cases. But right now we're stating that if you commit a crime that is that is of criminal sexual conduct, there is no leniency from the judge. You serve the minimum. And the other one was raising the penalties, which was by Senator Pito July, raising the penalties for repeat offenders.
right?
And
And so if these bills were to pass, that example we like to use, the 19-year-old, 15-year-old, first offense is a misdemeanor. Second offense would be the mandatory sentence, which is, I think, 10 years is what the AG said.
Yeah, I think we have a lot to talk about.
So we
Yeah.
we had said in jest, and it's a terrible thing to say, first time you get away with it, second time you do 10, so.
Yeah. So,
one of the things we try to do here, and it was just to get the conversation in the right court.
Right.
Criminal court is not, in my opinion, not the place for this conversation to happen. Now, I just want to share a quick story. When I was a firefighter, on numerous occasions, we knew certain addresses where these were frequent flyer addresses. Every time we go there, we saw a female that was brutalized, but she would never press charges. She said she would fall, something along those lines. When 911 gets the call, they'll dispatch police, but police officers would radio us to go in there because we know exactly what we're going to deal with, and we know that the victim is more likely to talk to an EMT or a firefighter, and we can actually give them the help they need. After we're done, the cops are already around the corner. They'll show up, and ma'am, what happened? She's going to say, oh, I fell. When all the neighbors are calling in, screaming, there's disruptions. So we're just trying to get help for the people who deserve the help. Like I said, both parties are the victim here. It's not just the
I think
perpetrator.
that's kind of a generalization, though.
The perpetrator, if you're a minor,
Yeah.
there's clearly you got some growing up to do. You're still developing.
Yeah,
We wanna
but
be
again,
able
in
to-
the case of the 19-year-old and the 15-year-old, which is the worst case scenario, I don't necessarily know if I want to think that the 19-year-old is a victim. I feel like that's a big age gap, and that, I mean, I agree with you in that it almost seems predatory.
yeah.
And I also, the other thing is I can't imagine you as a fireman.
I did a year and a half
Nice,
Wow,
good.
very good.
in Montgomery
Very nice.
County.
Wow.
One thing, and I don't want to talk urban legends. This is not an urban legend. I've seen cases where these older guys try to get parents to sign contracts allowing them to have sexual relations with their underage children. This is, yes. Yes.
We're talking like,
We'll name names after we go offline,
Right,
but
right.
yeah, a case you probably very well know about.
okay.
This is the kind of extent of behavior we're dealing with. I think we're dealing with, and one key thing, and I want to encourage everybody, the University of Guam is 60-40, 60% women, 40% guys. If you're 18 or 19 years old and you need a girlfriend or a boyfriend, come to the University of Guam. Okay, how about that? I'll make a pitch for my university. Even
Hey,
though
you
I'm not
guys
here-
have your own
here
problems
for the
over there at
university.
EOG.
Well, yeah, and not be a predator. I'm talking
Right,
about
yeah, legit.
healthy dating.
Right,
Okay.
right, okay. So what's the next step for you guys?
I think once the bill gets assigned to committee, it won't be assigned to our committee, so they'll be the one to set up the public hearing. And mention that recommendation you had about having a couple more stakeholder meetings, and I think now that people are finally realizing the impact of this bill, more people are actually coming up and continuing this discussion, which is, like I said before, it's good, and we need to, in no way is our office trying to prevent that. We, in fact, encourage
Nice,
these types
yeah.
of discussions.
But I think you also need to be responsible and all parties involved and quit using strictly the 16-year-old, 15-year-old analogy, because I see that everybody is pushing, Bill 50 in particular. That's the analogy they're using, and it's I feel it's almost disingenuous.
Also, I'd hope that we can get this message out even the law hasn't changed yet.
Right.
If there's a 19-year-old running around thinking now that 15-year-olds or even 14-year-olds are fair game, that's entirely wrong. And if I find out about them, I'll push the Attorney General's office to fully prosecute those
You're
kinds
so
of people.
vindictive.
No, I have to be.
Yeah.
Because we have to maintain the laws that exist today, and parents should not be worrying that suddenly, because they think the law is going to be changed in the future, their young people are no longer given that security.
Right,
And we
yeah.
need to assure the public nothing changes until it changes.
Yeah.
But I think if you find a victim who's been, who's fallen victim to predators, I think the three of us will be there with you at GPD and file the complaint with you and make sure that justice is served.
Yeah.
In no way do we condone sexual predators. That's not what this bill
Right.
is trying to do.
And I think if that's the case, then you guys should be responsible and really look at closing this close age exception, because you agree that seems to be the real point of contention with everybody.
No, and look, if they're saying there's been 20 cases over 2 years.
So you're
and-
saying it's justified.
and
But see,
before
with this,
that-
I'd like to see what ages we're talking about.
I'm
you know
going
what
to
I mean?
show me the data. Show
Yeah.
me what the data
Yeah,
says.
yeah,
And-
yeah. I'm not saying I don't
yeah,
believe you. I'm just saying I wanna
believe
see it,
you, okay?
I'm just saying, I'm glad that we're finally having,
Yeah.
because clearly this has been an issue for years based on what they're telling us.
Yep.
And it's good that we're finally doing something about it.
Yeah, and this is what we'd call a diversion process, and there's nothing wrong with diversion process.
Wait, do you mean this is a diversion? Like
Yeah,
they're
it's
trying
a
to
diversion
divert
from
us
a felony,
I see, yeah.
is what it is. And they don't end up on the sex offender registry and things like that, which I don't think is a good thing. If a young person, if there are cases of 15 to 16-year-olds, which I'm very, very unfamiliar with, then of course diversion's a ready alternative. And as I said at the beginning of our conversation, I believe in Speaker Barnes. I think she's a great leader. I think that it's great that she got the bill out to get it discussed and everything else. And I think the other three senators who are co-signing the bill, I think it's good that we discuss these things. And it makes for important community discussions because it shows where our values are.
You know, one thing I noticed that people grumble about is if there was like some kind of personal reason for introducing this bill. You know, people talk. Oh, there was a friend of a former AG whose child or someone that the speaker knew. Or is there any particular case that was the impetus for these bills?
Like I said, the AG's office came to us the second week of January. By today, I checked my email to find out the exact timeline this morning.
Right.
After I spoke to you, January 22nd, we got the draft bill. We introduced it almost
Right.
a month later.
So
I've
this
got a
probably is
wild
something
theory.
that they probably had and wanted to give maybe the last legislature.
I've got a wild
Possibly.
theory for you on this. I think somebody went off island to a conference, as this ended up in their trip report, and now they're trying to justify it. So this is a way of justifying their trips. How about
See,
that?
we learned something on that trip. All right. Hey, well, Shiraga,
Conspiracy theories.
we love him. Well, thanks for coming. I appreciate you taking your time out. Yep, good.
I was
And
very impressed with
yeah.
this gentleman.
Right on.
I really am.
Thank
I'm
you.
very, very impressed.
Everybody told him don't do this
No,
Facebook
it's
Live
great.
show with Chris and Ron, and
Oh.
he's here, so thank you.
Very good.
Thank you for having me.
Hey, again, my name is Chris Barnett, Dr. Raghu Ganesh from Speaker Tina Mooney Barnes' office, Shirag Bajwani. This has been Group Chat. To our Facebook Live audience, again, thank you for starting your day the KUAM way, and be sure to check out our starting lineup the rest of the week. My name's Chris. Thanks for watching. Hasta adios.